The final flight of Gulf Air 72, it was a warm evening at Bahrain International Airport, and the sky was clear as Flight 72, a modern Airbus A320, made its approach. On board were 143 souls, including passengers from 16 countries and an eager flight crew. But as the aircraft roared toward the runway, it was evident that something was seriously wrong. The plane was too fast, too high, and barreling toward a rushed landing. Yet, in a dangerous act of denial, the pilots decided to press on. Moments from touchdown, as reality struck, the captain made a desperate decision to abort and circle back for another attempt. What followed was a storm of confusion, disbelief, and a clash of personalities that would seal the fate of this ill-fated flight. This is the story of Gulf Air Flight 72, a tale of human error, cockpit dynamics, and the fragile balance of trust and authority in the skies. A routine flight gone awry day began in Cairo, Egypt, where 135 passengers and 8 crew members boarded the Gulf Air 320 for a 3-hour journey to Bahrain. The mood was lighthearted as tourists and business travelers settled in. However, cracks in the operation appeared even before takeoff. The flight crew arrived late to the gate, having been delayed by confusion over its location. Compounding the problem, they were sleep-deprived, having spent the previous evening exploring Cairo, enjoying late-night dinner, and even trying their luck at a casino. By the time they reached the cockpit, their focus was split between rushing to make up lost time and maintaining operational precision, a perilous combination. Meet the men in command. At the helm of Flight 72 were 2 men whose contrasting personalities created a volatile dynamic: Captain Ishan Shakib. At 37 years old, Shakib was a seasoned pilot with nearly 5,000 flying hours under his belt. Though competent, his confidence sometimes tipped into overconfidence. Known for challenging authority and boasting of his technical knowledge, he had recently been promoted to captain, despite receiving barely passing scores in key emergency simulations. First Officer Khalaf Al-Alawi, just 25, Alawi was a rookie with only 600 flying hours. While eager to learn, he was timid, hesitant to challenge authority, and known to defer to more experienced pilots even when they made questionable decisions. This pairing of an assertive captain and a meek first officer set the stage for what would become a tragic lesson in cockpit dynamics. A dangerous descent as the A320 began its descent into Bahrain, the cracks widened. The pilot skipped a critical step: the approach briefing. This pre-landing discussion allows the crew to plan for the runway's unique challenges, aligning their strategies for a safe touchdown. Without it, the team was flying blind, relying on assumptions instead of preparation. Adding to the tension, Captain Shakib removed the A320's inbuilt speed limits during descent. The aircraft hurtled toward the airport at a blistering 315 knots, far too fast for a safe approach. The captain, confident in his abilities, pressed on, seemingly unaware of the mounting danger. The first officer, aware of the excessive speed, remained silent. His lack of intervention would prove critical as the aircraft roared toward Bahrain, seconds from disaster. With just 5 miles to the runway, the plane was still moving at over 220 knots, almost twice the recommended speed for final approach. The flaps and landing gear, essential for slowing down, were deployed too late. At 1,500 feet, the aircraft was still unstable, with its speed and altitude far from acceptable landing parameters. By the time the captain manually took over from the autopilot, it was a race against physics. Despite reminders to stabilize by 500 feet, a Gulf Air protocol designed to avoid rushed landings, the crew failed to meet the mark. The clash of personalities. This wasn't just a technical failure, it was a human one. The overconfidence of the captain and the passivity of the first officer created a lethal cocktail in the cockpit. Shakib's dominance silenced Alawi's growing concerns, and the absence of teamwork sealed their fate. A story to remember. What unfolded that night over Bahrain is more than an aviation accident. It's a chilling reminder of the importance of preparation, humility, and communication in high-stakes environments. Gulf Air Flight 72 serves as a sobering example of how small cracks in protocol and personality can lead to catastrophic outcomes. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the final moments of this flight and uncover the lessons learned from this tragic event. As Gulf Air Flight 72 descended toward Bahrain International Airport, tension in the cockpit was rising. The pilots were fast approaching a critical juncture, but in the passenger cabin, all seemed routine. No one realized they were mere minutes away from disaster. Approaching the runway, the plane was descending too quickly and too fast for a safe landing. A critical decision loomed: abandon the landing and try again. At just 700 feet and a mile from the runway, the captain finally conceded, "We're not going to make it." Abandoning the approach should have been straightforward. The missed approach procedure for runway 12 was clear: climb to 2,500 feet, then circle back for another attempt. But instead of following protocol, the captain took an unorthodox and dangerously reckless approach. He decided to execute a sharp 360-degree turn, or orbit, just 500 feet above the ground, over the Persian Gulf. This was an incredibly risky maneuver at such a low altitude, far from standard procedure. Yet the first officer, who should have challenged the captain, remained silent. His inaction reflected a concerning imbalance in the cockpit dynamic. A passive first officer and an over-assertive captain, a lethal mix for effective crew resource management. A dangerous descent as the plane banked into its orbit, the captain's erratic control inputs began to create chaos. Instead of making smooth, calculated adjustments, he overcorrected repeatedly, pushing the plane into steep climbs and descents. Passengers were jostled violently in their seats, feeling the disorienting effects of fluctuating G-forces. To make matters worse, the captain began mixing visual references from the dark sea and sky outside with information from his instruments, a recipe for spatial disorientation. Studies show even experienced pilots can fall prey to such illusions, and Gulf Air Flight 72's captain was no exception. At one point, the plane came perilously close to the water, just 330 feet above the surface, the equivalent of 3 Airbus A320 wingspans. The situation was spiraling out of control. A crew and the first officer remained passive, failing to call out dangerous deviations from procedure. Meanwhile, the captain, overwhelmed and increasingly disoriented, was making decisions based on instinct rather than training. This chaos peaked during the go-around maneuver. Instead of following prescribed procedures, power up, nose pitched to 15 degrees, the captain pitched to just 9 degrees, compounding the danger. Disoriented by acceleration, he misinterpreted the sensation of being pushed back into his seat as the plane climbing too steeply. His response was catastrophic. He pushed the nose further down. At breakneck speed, the A320 hurtled toward the sea. The ground proximity warning system blared, "Pull up, pull up." But the overwhelmed crew, preoccupied with flap settings and warning chimes, ignored the alarm. Moments later, Gulf Air Flight 72 struck the Persian Gulf. All 143 people on board perished, a tragedy rooted in culture. The crash of Flight 72 wasn't merely the result of poor decisions in the cockpit. It revealed deep-seated flaws in Gulf Air's safety culture. Investigators found that the airline lacked a formal crew resource management (CRM) training program. Pilots weren't adequately trained to handle high-stress situations, and the company failed to enforce strict adherence to standard operating procedures. Further issues included overworked crews, a lack of transparency about past incidents, and deficient training on go-around maneuvers. In hindsight, the crash seemed almost inevitable. Learning from tragedy in the wake of the disaster, Gulf Air overhauled its operations. The airline introduced mandatory CRM training, emphasizing teamwork and assertiveness in the cockpit. New policies included anonymous safety reporting, stricter speed limits below 10,000 feet, and rigorous probation for newly promoted captains. Today, Gulf Air stands as a much safer airline, but the lessons of Flight 72 serve as a stark reminder: no amount of technology can replace well-trained, well-coordinated crews and a robust safety culture. This tragedy wasn't just a failure of systems or procedures, it was a failure of communication and human judgment. As air travel evolves, the memory of Gulf Air Flight 72 underscores the vital importance of vigilance, collaboration, and training to ensure such a disaster never happens again.